Folks, thanks so much for tuning in again today, and thanks for putting up with a little bit of a difference in terms of timeline, getting this news out to you, and even the production studios that we're using. As you can see, this is not my usual studio. We're on the move. We're in Oklahoma speaking to state legislators and into the governor's office and the Capitol, meeting with various groups. Been an amazing time. Just quickly, want to thank a couple of viewers. One, I got corrected. Yesterday I was talking about immigration programs and illegal immigration across the border, and I referred to Romanians, and I meant the Roma people. That is different than Romanians. The Roma being more of a gypsy population in parts of Europe, not Romanians. So thanks for that call in. And I had to laugh at one. I had a viewer calling in, another astute woman, and she said I pronounced the word testosterone. How could I have done that? I don't know, but thanks for the correction, folks. Keep those coming in. We want to keep accurate, never want to be accused of fake news. Still in Oklahoma here, and watching what is how things are being described with the visit of President Trump to China. You'll notice what they do. You'll see on the headlines, it looks like, great comradeship between President Trump and between President Xi. And yes, President Xi saying he's very concerned about Iran, and yes, they're going to work together and all of this type. And then what they do, watch for then it's usually another official slightly lower that comes out with a statement summarizing something that's been said. And so we see, for instance, out of the Foreign Ministry Department, a gentleman, interesting last name by the name of Mao, has some historical connection there. But he's saying, oh, no, look, he's actually not saying no, he's saying Taiwan independence, and I'm quoting him here, it depends on this reconciliation of China and Taiwan, and he said it's as irreconcilable as fire and water. So what they'll do, the main guy, being the President Xi, will come out with a statement looking very peaceful, and so will President Trump, and then you'll have either Chinese official or maybe Marco Rubio coming out and saying something that shows there's still a lot of tension there. So we'll see in the days to follow what's going to happen from that. It's basically overall being seen as a good thing that these two major powers are talking to each other. Also interesting to see what happens, and sometimes these are timed deliberately because in congressional meetings back at the U.S. right at the same time, we see the CIA and their scientific analysis now have concluded that multiple times between 2021 and 2023, there were indeed related to COVID lab leaks were the origin of COVID-19, and really putting the blame on China there. So doing this right at the time when President Trump is over in China. So watch for that ongoing story, and you possibly might see indictments of U.S. officials for trying to hide the fact that indeed, according to the CIA, these lab leaks were coming from China and not being reported. Well, on the electoral front, we see in Louisiana, there's a big push on there, Republican Senate candidate. Her name is Julia Letlow. And she is pushing hard for for getting DEI and all the woke system out of their government systems. But the incumbent, Senator Bill Cassidy, what he's been doing, he's running videos of her several years ago where when she was involved in the education departments, she was really pushing diversity, equity, and inclusion. You're going to see more and more of this, folks, as these woke initiatives fall more and more and increasingly fall out of public favor and are increasingly exposed as being undemocratic and pushing strange doctrines on people. You're going to see those who once were proclaiming them. Does that mean they're not telling the truth now, that they're not really wokest and they never were? No, it shows the amount of fear in academic communities which still exists on anybody who would be at all suggesting that the whole DEI push is wrong and there should be more freedom of expression allowed. So anyway, we'll see if in Louisiana that attack is successful or not. The woman who is running past comments she'd made, and now she's saying she's not for DEI. We'll see what happens on that. In a look ahead with Mayor Mamdani in Zoran Mamdani being the mayor of New York and bringing in extreme socialist, outright communist programming. Now it looks like his challenger is going to be a guy by the name of Michael Rappaport, and he is vowing to be, this is going to be a daily street fight between him and Zoran Mondani in terms of the fact that he says, and there's some proof to it, that when a jurisdiction, whether it's a city or state, brings in extreme high regulation, high tax programs, so-called driving out the billionaires, that's going to hurt the overall prosperity of that region. So watch for ongoing matchup. You can say you were the first to hear it. Michael Rappaport seems to be the guy who's going to be in the news almost every day, eventually challenging Mondani in the next mayoralty race. We'll see what happens. We'll also, on this front, we see, you might not have heard of the Cherry Blossom Open. This is the United States fencing competition. It's a very high level fencing. That's basically what we call sword fights at the University of Maryland. And because the Olympic Committee, and we're very appreciative of that, because the Olympic Committee has said in the Olympics, biological men are not going to be able to compete, not be allowed to compete against women, no matter how many trans procedures they've been through. So a trans fencer by the name of Dina Jukic, now this is a biologically born male, switched its name, I'll just say its because I don't know really how to refer to them anymore, to female, but not being allowed to compete because it's a U.S. sanctioned competition, and the Olympic Committee has said no to that. So watch for more of these stories continuing to emerge, and hopefully it's going to mean where we will have girls and women being able to compete only against themselves and not against biological males. And with all the uproar that goes with this, I still say there should be an entire category. People are saying they feel left out if they can't compete, even though they're a biological male, they want to compete against girls. Have their own league, have a whole separate runway of bio people, you could call it whatever you like, call it the trans games or whatever you like, and then they wouldn't feel that they're not able to compete. They'd have to compete fairly and not unfairly. Anyway, let's see if that takes on, gathers any headway. Well, the media is always trying to distract from, right at the time when President Trump is over there in China, they're trying to raise a story and maybe, I don't know, get some scintillating kind of reporting on a longtime aide of President Trump. And this is a young woman, her name's Natalie Harp, and she is actually in charge of the content on his Truth Social stuff. She basically has to work 24 hours a day just to keep up with them. But it seems like media is trying to make a bit of something. We're not quite sure what. Talking about her and the fact that now senior people in Trump's office are saying she's not going through them, she's not checking with them, and there could be a bit of an upheaval there, why he's allowing Natalie Harp direct access. She's actually a very interesting young woman in the 2020 Republican National Convention. She actually credited, you're familiar with a policy you may be, called it's called the Right to Try policy, where he has drastically reduced all of the impediments to people being able to try experimental cancer treatment. And as you know, the regulators can sometimes unnecessarily block people who are really on death's door. They're going to die any way they feel, and they make themselves available for treatment. She was one of the early ones as a young woman who was diagnosed to be very terminal and in a short period of time, and she signed up for this on the Right to Try, and as it turned out, she has had a remarkable turnaround of health. Pretty good news story. I'm still scratching my head saying, what is the media trying to make of this going after Natalie Harp? But watch it, because anytime you're in the office of a leader, as she is, and if you are especially younger and appear to be going around those who are in the palace guard, you could be in trouble. Let's watch and see what happens there. Well, you remember, those of you who would be watching right-leaning television, even just a few years ago, the name Sebastian Gorka, you may remember him. He was constantly on talking about security issues, and now he's very influential in the National Security Council. And he's been talking a lot about domestic terrorism And the suggestion is that domestic terrorism can be not just people who are on your own soil, blowing up bombs, blowing up people, but people who are, in fact, trying to stir up domestic terrorist thinking, even suggesting that Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes, who are, as you know, well, it's being harder and harder to define what they are anymore, as domestic terrorists because they are advancing the causes of Sharia law. They will dispute that, but watch for these designations. Are they going to continue to emerge? I don't know, but very interesting to see. Paul McCartney is back in the news. He's never long out of the news. He's a little bit of controversy because he's getting tired of whenever he's out in public, people want to take a selfie with him. And he's just telling people, put away your phone. You're not taking a picture of me. And that's getting a bit of a controversy. He is a billionaire, and he did make money from his fans, of course. And he's now telling the fans, put away the phones, and that's getting some of them a little upset. He's also, in a recent interview, talked about his favorite song, a Beatles song of all time, was the song Imagine. And that's got a little controversy going because, of course, that song famously sings about a world with no religion, no God. And that's bringing back all kinds of controversy. So Paul McCartney kind of stirring it up a bit. And on this notion, there are many entertainers, actors, athletes who are in fact billionaires, but they're never the ones that people like AOC and others want to attack as billionaires that shouldn't be allowed to be billionaires. So if you're a singer, if you're an actor, if you're a famous athlete, and I have no issue with anybody becoming a billionaire or a trillionaire as long as they're doing it by legal means, but they never get attacked. But the ones who invested hard all their lives, most billionaires start out, I've interviewed many of them on a master's program, start out poor, risk everything, work hard. Eventually their product, whatever it is, or service becomes more and more popular. They turn it into on the stock market. They become billionaires. They're not making $1 billion a year. They are worth over $1 billion because their stock is worth over $1 billion. If they had to be selling it or overtaxed on it, the whole company would collapse. Thousands of people would be out of work. But it's never the Hollywood billionaires that it seems these socialists go after. Well, one billionaire that Canada's going after, his name is Nikita Anatolievich. And I'll probably get a phone call on that one. His last name is Mishin. He's a Russian billionaire, made it through the railway business, and he is on the sanction list, and maybe rightly so, on Canada, not allowed to do business. All his funds are frozen. He's trying to make the case that he was actually opposing Vladimir Putin, even when he was in Russia, and he shouldn't be sanctioned. His money should be let loose. I'm going to say to Mr. Nikita Anatolievich Mishin, be careful. Anybody who's Russian and got a lot of money and speaking against Putin, they have a way of accidentally falling off of rooftop buildings or out of the window of their hotel room, or being found, accidentally shooting themselves in the back of the head 4 times. So I would say he needs to be a bit careful, but he's appealing to the Canadian government for the sanctions to be lifted. Well, somebody else who's falling out a bit out of favor, recent polling on Premier Ford in the Ontario government shows that his popularity numbers are doing it, not just because he ordered that $30 million private jet and then, in fact, had to cancel it because people were so upset. But the key is here, I'm speaking to many of my colleagues who are still in politics and in leadership roles, and I congratulate them for that. It doesn't matter, even if you're great, small c conservative, even conservatives seem that there's a self-life issue here. In terms of if you hang around too long. So you might want to watch that. Let's see if what's going to transpire here with Premier Ford. Is he going to be falling out of favor increasingly with the public? But just interesting to see that. Well, Premier Danielle Smith in Canada, who is small c conservative and not falling out of favor, still got a lot of good support. As you may know, and as I said, I'm still in Oklahoma, and I'm speaking in their legislature here, and speaking on various talk shows. And there's a lot of interest around the notion of is Alberta really wanting to separate and join the U.S.? And I'm being very clear that there is a strong sentiment in Alberta to be independent, to secede from Canada, but not necessarily to join the U.S. And as I'm telling people down here, there are a certain number of signatures that are required, that if you can get that in a province, you can actually move that along the pathway to getting it to come to a vote, the whole question of whether you should separate or not. And that was blocked just yesterday by a judge, and the judge has ruled that in the gaining of the signatures and also in the process that the Alberta government's following, they haven't consulted enough with First Nations groups. They talk about the Athabasca Chippewa tribe, they talk about the Blood tribe and the Siksika Nation tribe, they said, and the Crowfoot tribe. They said that the government and those getting the signatures didn't consult enough with them, and so they are striking it down, at least for now. They're putting on a hold procedurally in terms of one of the steps involved in getting to a vote. Now, I have said all along that if a vote was successful, Alberta would be years and years in court cases before they ever got to exist as a totally independent nation because of the challenges in court. I'm just stating that as a fact. I agree with the grievances that Albertans have towards the federal government and think Alberta should be more autonomous, but can probably make more headway as a province with more autonomy. And that anytime you have indecision, anytime you have questions unanswered, as would happen if a separation vote succeeded, you're going to have years of court cases. So now here, even the raising of the signatures, even getting to the vote, being questioned by a number of First Nation tribes, it just shows it's a very difficult road to head down if you want to move away from being Canada. But I've told our American friends the sentiment is not an overwhelming sentiment to join the U.S. I've made that clear. Well, Sobeys and Loblaws and a couple of the main grocery groups are now, they're catching a bit of heat because in the light of all the anti-American feeling relative to Trump's tariffs, grocery stores are in a rush to just, slap maple leaf flags on everything. And consumers are being a little closer, and they're watching and they're reading the labels carefully and finding out more and more some of the products that have the maple leaf slapped on it, in fact, are not actually 100% Canadian made. And big companies, Sobeys and Loblaws, pulling back. They call it maple washing, pulling back the maple leaf because some of the products might not be 100%. Well, another person that's getting pulled back is British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, as we predicted, and then as we saw become a reality. Labour was punished in the polls in these municipal and regional elections in the UK. We predicted that. Those of you who are regular watchers and listeners, you were warned of that first. And he says he's going to keep fighting for his job. He's going to hang on, but keep watching that. I don't know how much longer he can handle and hang on. I was just in a discussion about policy relative to Israel with some of the on some of the talk shows down here in the United States. And when I did the documentary on October 7th, as many of you know, I went to Israel. I was sponsored by some Jewish groups out of Toronto and also out of media groups out of, these are faith-based television group out of the United States. And we went over and the IDF accompanied us. They gave us film crew and sound crew. We went into the areas that have been attacked. And when I was talking about the grotesque, graphic nature of the attacks, the sexualized nature of it, not a lot of mainstream reporting. Mainstream reporting doesn't really like to go into the detail on that, but there's a new report. It's just out, and you've probably seen it, and it gives great detail in terms of the planning of the attacks by Hamas. It was key to their attacks. There had to be. This was part of their planning. It wasn't just, crazed warriors, as bad as and awful as that can be. It was planned. They say, we're going to make this very sexualized. Rape is going to be a key component of it, and sexual attacks and sexual devastation has to be a key part of it. So when you're out there on the streets supporting Hamas, and what wonderful people they are, just know that it was thought out plan. The vicious nature was a key component of what they were doing. So I wonder how you can keep, those of you who support Hamas can keep doing that. Polls out yesterday for those who are in Canada watching the U.S. elections coming up, and also eventually the next presidential election. People were, for the last couple of years, have been dismissing AOC and saying there's no way, she's just too far out there, way too crazy, not smart. She'll never be in a contention for the presidential ticket for the Democrats. And I said, be careful, be careful. She has a way of catching on. Mainstream media kind of love her. They're going to present her as credible. And the recent poll just out yesterday shows her, and this is just a poll, but it's a significant poll, shows her out front in the running of those who would run. She's ahead of Newsom in California. She's ahead of Pete Buttigieg in the running. Watch out. This is getting extreme far left, and I call it wild. But Alexandria Cortez, AOC coming out there way ahead in the polling. So keep an eye on that. Well, as often happens when a conservative party surprises in some country and pulls ahead of the mainstream party, the culturally Marxist parties, in this case, as we know, it was the Labour Party. Once any kind of party that is centered to the right, media are furious with that. Cultural media are furious that we the people, or they the people, aren't listening to them and not continuing to vote in leftists. So what they do now they're doing this. They're going candidate by candidate. This is how the media always works for people who got elected under a reform ticket. And now there may be some weirdos in there, and there may be some Holocaust deniers in there. And if there are, let's root that out. But one by one now, you will see the media process of painting anybody who votes center-right or anybody who votes against some of the ridiculous immigration parties is a wacko, is a nut job of some kind. That process has begun. Watch it to continue, the analysis to continue on people who were running under the banner of Reform UK. And talk about banner switching, the Pennsylvania Democrat Senator John Fetterman, I know you're aware of him. He is really going hard after his own party's hypocrisy, especially on foreign policy, the fact that the Democrats will not be supportive of this notion that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon, must be stopped from having a nuclear weapon, because he knows, as many of us know, Iran, a theologically insane group of Islamists like there are in the Iranian regime, if they get a nuclear weapon, they will see it as a badge of honor to use it on Israel and other countries. And so here we've got John Fetterman talking about what's called Trump derangement syndrome. That's this syndrome where people are against Trump, whatever he does. He could invent the cure to cancer and they won't support it. And here he's going after his own Democrats, saying the Iranians must not be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. And it's just Trump derangement syndrome that's stopping clear thinking on that. Well, looking at trends with Gen Z, article in the New York Times talking about the fact that cursive writing, and now we're not talking about cursing while you're writing, we're talking about what many of us grew up with, that's just writing in a cursive form, is actually having a comeback among some of the younger students, younger generations. They never learned it, they're fascinated by it, and extracurricular clubs are popping up not just in schools, but in libraries. And because the so-called Common Core a number of years ago dropped the cursive writing, they say, everything's going to be on the internet, you don't need how to write anymore. And there's a resurgence of focus on it. Very interesting to watch that swinging around. But also student-athlete prayer groups, we hear about those from time to time. They're becoming more prevalent in the public system. Public expressions of faith among the Gen Z crowd, and Bible literacy programs and Bible programs on campus in public schools, even though the officials try to shut them down, are gaining in popularity. Interesting to see these shift, folks. Thanks. We'll see if it continues. Thanks for tuning in. Still out of Oklahoma tomorrow, and one more broadcast out of Oklahoma. Thanks for tuning in. Bye now.